Mary Atwood, and I'm part of the team at Channel McGilchrist, Dr. Ian McGilchrist's new official online platform, which was created to help highlight how his work is fundamental to helping us meet the challenges of our times, the scope of which is as broad as it is deep. So Ian encourages other people to take up his work in their fields, and my guest today is someone who's done precisely that. I was introduced to Orlando Wood, who works in advertising, and we thought it would be really interesting to chat to Orlando because he's written a best-selling and widely acclaimed book on advertising called Lemon. Lemon draws on Ian's work and applies Ian's ideas to modern-day advertising and culture. And Ian has described Orlando's book Lemon as a highly original and fascinating application of hemisphere theory. Lemon is a unique combination of neuroscience, cultural history, and advertising research. It describes a change in advertising style that's occurred over the last 15 years that has undermined advertising effectiveness, much as paintings or sculpture might tell us something about the type of attention that was being brought to bear on the world in the past. Advertising, which reflects and leads culture, can help us to understand the type of attention that is being brought to bear on the world today. Orlando shows how advertising and ads themselves have become increasingly left-brained in recent years, and ads are less noticeable and less memorable as a result. Orlando works as Chief Innovation Officer of advertising research company System 1, and his work has influenced thinking and practice in market research, marketing, and advertising, earning him recognition from many industry bodies, including the ARF, the AMA, and the IPA. Orlando is Honorary Fellow of the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising. So welcome to Orlando. So thank you for coming and having a chat today, Orlando, by Zoom, as we're so used to
Absolute
now.
Pleasure. Lovely
our
to be here.
virtual meetings. So what struck me about your book, I think, most poignantly really, is how masterfully you managed to put forward sort of rather complex ideas around neuroscience, which obviously Dr. Ian McGilchrist's work, which we're both very familiar with, has done. And you've interwoven that with these changes in advertising effectiveness that you've seen through your experience and your work. So for someone from the outside who hasn't read Lemon, could you give us, if you can at all, if possible, a very brief overview of the book? And it's divided into a number of sections which focus on various aspects of advertising and the brain.
Yes, well, of course. I mean, the book is really an attempt to diagnose and I suppose provide a cure for advertising's ills. I mean, advertising is going through a crisis, really, a crisis in effectiveness. So the last 15, 20 years, you know, we've seen advertising effectiveness plummet, and there are many reasons for it. But what Lemon does is try to show that it's really, in large part, a fault of the work itself. The advertising itself is less noticeable, less memorable, doesn't connect as well with people as it used to. And so what the book does is it's in 5 chapters, but it opens by talking about this crisis in creativity in advertising in this new digital world, you know. And then the second chapter really draws very heavily on Ian's work. You know, it influenced me hugely and was the impetus for the book, really. Mm-hmm. And I talk about the left and the right brain, and I go into some detail on it. And I go through various chapters in history, as Ian does in his brilliant book, and show, you know, with imagery how this sort of shift has happened before. And then in chapter 3, I go on to talk about how we're seeing it today in culture in the last 20 years or so, in music, in television programming, in film franchises, but also in advertising. And I show how this shift happened, you know, in about 2006, away from whole-brained advertising, or even slightly right-brained advertising, as I use, it's the shorthand I use, towards this left brain dominant style, this aesthetic style. And it has a real bearing on how people connect with the work, whether they notice it. You know, it's frankly much less watchable than it used to be. And it has a real bearing on effectiveness, and it helps to explain why advertising effectiveness fell off a cliff, you know, in about 2006. And then, you know, but what it helps us, I think, to do is to show that the truth in Ian's work, you know, today, and how this shift has happened, you know, in our lifetimes. And it's, you know, I go on then to explain why it might have happened, you know. So why has the left brain taken over in business, in advertising? Lots of reasons for it. There isn't one single, you know, it's not the left brained of me to say there was direct linear cause and effect here. There are lots of things happening. And then the fifth chapter, I sort of try to point towards a more, I suppose, whole-brained, right-brained advertising style, one that, you know, uses metaphor, character, humor, all of these things that are so important to connect with people and you know, make for effective work. So that's the sort of summary. And then there's a manifesto at the end for agencies, ad agencies, you know, on what, you know, this might be, you know, how we might fix things. And you know, the book has been I've been really touched by the reception of it. You know, it's been very well received by all sorts of people, actually. And you know, it's been a pleasure to write and talk about. Well, I mean, advertising, as I say in the book, both leads and reflects culture. And you know, a trip to the Museum of Brands in London will tell you that. You know, that the artifacts that it leaves behind are a very good, I suppose, indication of what people were thinking about at the time and how they were looking at the world. So you absolutely see today's world in advertising. And you've got this very didactic, me at you, unilateral kind of communication that's happening with words on the screen. You'll notice most ads these days have some sort of words telling you what to think or do, very much like Reformation art, if we can call it that. And this sense of abstraction is very similar to I mean, we are going through a reformation of sorts today in many ways. And you know, this stripping back of things to the authentic, the removal of characters from advertising. You see this, you know, the removal of metaphor, the removal of ornament, really, and things that you know that actually people enjoy, you know, and give them a sort of embodied sense of the world. Those things have disappeared from advertising, and I think are disappearing from culture more broadly. And one of the worrying things I found was that over time, whereas advertising used to reference other things, you know, reference other cultural works. You know, I remember Carling Black Label ads for referencing Hamlet, you know, or you know, Heineken ads referencing Wordsworth. You know, I wandered about a bit on my own. No, that's not right. That wonderful ad. And you know, that's disappeared. So it's stuck in its own hall of mirrors, which is one of the things that that Ian says about the left brain. Is that it kind of, you know, if there's only the left brain, it kind of gets stuck in its sort of inward looking sort of models of the world that try to explain the world, but often, you know, fail.
Absolutely. Yeah. Should we have a look at some of your images, Orlando, that will sort of serve to highlight really what's happened in advertising, and also this sort of shift in how we see the world and how the image has changed?
Yes. Well, one of the things I do in the book, and when I present the book, is you know, I look at the tetrarchy, so late Roman, the late Roman Empire, before it collapsed, and you know, I think this is a very helpful way of and Ian talks about this. Of course, Ian introduced me to this idea. But there was a very a wonderful academic called H.P. Lorange who wrote about this, and he talks about the shift in aesthetic, really, as you know, we moved into the tetrarchy, and so what happened in this period was that Emperor Diocletian assumed sovereignty without approval of the Senate, and he set about regimenting society, and he fixed prices across the whole of Europe, and in fact. That's very much like the business world today, the fixing of prices everywhere. But the fixing of prices across Europe. And this meant that people sort of started to shut up their businesses or go out of business because they couldn't really make a profit. So he introduced a new law, which meant that, sons had to follow in their father's footsteps in their professions, otherwise they'd be executed. And this led to a kind of specialization. So there was a kind of specialization, a centralization, and a standardization that took place in this period, that has many echoes today, actually, in this globalized world. And you see, within a matter of a few generations, things change in architecture and in friezes, in busts, in art. So I just wanted to show you a few of these things because it sort of shows, I think it helps to bring to life what's happening today. So if you look at this bust on the left of Decius, just look at it for a moment, because there's this, this is a man caught in a moment, in lived time, as it were, with furrows on his brow, the scar on his cheek, the stubble on his chin, the folds in his tunic. And he's glancing upwards, he's caught in a moment, looking at the sky. And it sort of poses more questions than it seeks to answer, really. What's going on? What's he thinking? And then within a few generations, busts start to look more like this one here on the right, expressionless, devitalized, more like a death mask than anything living. And it's not just busts that change, and this, the busts change radically. There are some more extreme examples than this, but in architecture, things became more symmetrical. If you look at friezes, so the frieze on the left here from before Diocletian, you've got this free-flowing movement, you've got depth, you've got asymmetry, and as H.P. Larange points out, you move towards this sort of symmetrical, flattened, signs and symbols. So the cross within, interwoven by the vine, and you move from people connecting with each other. Sort of the sense of betweenness that Ian talks about, connection, but also depth, contrast, a sense that something's happening, people relating to each other, towards the sort of more unilateral style of communication here, and flat as well. And you move from, natural compositions of people touching each other, looking at each other, holding hands, looking around them, very close, towards this kind of flattened, sort of aesthetic, I suppose, with people looking at you frontally on. You see this in advertising a lot. But there's no sense of betweenness. And there's also this sense of replication that the left brain likes, this sense of repetition. And it's happening today. There's a dislocation from time and place. Where is this happening? I don't know. There's a dislocation from any real lived place. You see this. I'll show you more in a moment. This sort of rectilinearity, this straightness. This is not the way people stand. Artists have known this for a long time, that there's you don't stand like that. It's like they're puppets or props, and expressionless as well. So what I do is basically, I've shown that advertising looks like the advertising on the left here. So I could have picked many ads. These are just some, but advertising is flat. There's no background. There's no very little depth to it. It's sort of constructed in an artificial world. There's no sense of place to it. In a globalized world, you can't show place because one ad that works in the UK has to work everywhere. In fact, it ends up working nowhere. And you've got emphasis on signs and symbols, on words on the screen, abstraction. So you only ever see, bits of people. So perhaps just their mouth or their hands. This is how the left brain sees the world. It's often, there's a sense of lots of short, sharp frames. I mean, Ian talks in the book about how the left brain likes to atomize time into sort of slices, rather than see things in a sort of live time. And this unilateral me at you, there's an ad there with a person pointing, very much like many artwork of the Reformation. A lot of pointing goes on in Cranach and other paintings of the time. So this didactic, unilateral, flattened, devitalized sort of aesthetic, very different from the sorts of advertising you see on the right here. Now, these are just some examples from about 30 years ago. And you see here a distinct time. We know when and where these things are set. There's a sense of history as well. There's a connection with place. There's a connection between people, the way they look at each other, they touch each other, flirtation. People with their arms around each other. There are people here with accents who there's metaphor, there's humor. And that has by and large gone, and we've swung, over to this sort of advertising on the left here, which doesn't what I show is it doesn't elicit an emotional response in people. It doesn't get noticed or remembered, and that's a big problem for advertisers today. And it's also a problem for the people who have to watch it,
Right.
because it's just a lot of it's unwatchable. That's the truth of it.
I think that the images on the left, the advertising that we see today, they remind me very much of this. It's too close. Everything's sort of too close. It's too close. You can't even sort of see it, and there's absolutely no continuity of a story or a whole person even, which is in there.
And if there is if there are people shown, they're shown as props, as little puppets that do things.
And that's, I think, also that sense of depth and space and time, which are also closely connected. That the advertising, I suppose, that we grew up watching, in the 80s and 90s, has this sense of depth and space, which, as Ian highlights so much in his work, in terms of perspectival depth and space, is this sense of emotional depth as well, that they're interwoven, and that the hemispheres have two different takes on perspectival space and depth as well. The left hemisphere will see it as being something which is, sort of relating to the individual, but being where you're standing in the world, but at the same time, through the pull of the imagination, perspectival depth and space takes you into the story. This is a whole sort of sense of this loss, as you say, of the crisis in creativity. It's this whole loss of a true sense of the imagination as well, and the power of the imagination.
It is. And one of the things I love about Ian's work, is the link he draws between empathy and depth. These are things that go together. And, I think I'm not the only commentator to say that, advertising has lost its empathy with the people it seeks to talk to. And, when that empathy goes, funny, isn't it, how depth disappears too.
Absolutely. Well, it's fascinating seeing these side by side. It's so.
You really see, and which is your eye drawn to? I mean, you'll find there's another example I often use, and it's the one with the people, with the characters, with the living, something perhaps out of the ordinary, that the right brain is so attuned to. Ian talks about the 5 types of attention that psychologists might be said to broadly agree on, and how 4 of them are dealt with predominantly by the right brain, you know, so alertness and vigilance, sustained attention, divided attention. And it's only this very narrow goal-orientated attention that's dealt with by the left brain. So if we're seeking to attract and sustain people's attention, to elicit an emotional response, it's the you know, it's the right brain features that we need to focus on. It's people in a moment with something weird, perhaps odd happening or out of the ordinary, you know, an incident, and in a well-defined place, you know, where it's easy to tell what's happening.
No, it's fascinating. I think the images on the left as well, I mean, they do catch your eye, but they're actually quite stressful. You know, after a while, the fact they've been up there for some time, my eye is just so much more drawn to the images on the right, the adverts on the right, because they allow you to sort of have this sort of unraveling of a process, rather than sort of feel that you're being, as you said, they're sort of shouting at you, you're being bombarded with something else, rather than allowing the viewer to become a sort of seer, you know, to be able to sort of enter a process of mutual seeing and mutual discovery through what it is you're seeing. With the older advertisements, they tend to sort of allow this space to happen and unravel, whereas these ones give absolutely no consideration to the viewer whatsoever.
No, and I think your observation about being very close up to what you're seeing on the left is right. You know, there isn't the breadth, the broad view of what's happening, and how we connect with the wider world. It's very product focused, very up close, which is too much after a while. Oh, you're right. I mean, one of the things I do is I draw parallels between this and the shift from Renaissance art to
The Reformation.
The Reformation. You know, maybe I could just show you a couple, and I just want to show you two ads that really make the point very, very closely. So that, you know, I used Ian's example in the book. I think this is a wonderful example of how, you know, after that 1,000 years or so of flatness, you get depth emerging in art in a beautiful moment, really. Perspectival depth, but you get that sense of flow in the cavalcade behind, a movement, you know, in the figures, and the referencing of antiquity, so referencing of other periods in the architecture behind, but also the referencing of other artwork, the other cultural work. So on the right here, you've got the shepherds, you know, I think referencing a painting from 10 years before by Van der Goes. And then you've got the artist in another knowing reference. That's him pointing to Christ there at the front, note with his left hand. And, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? That you've got this empathy, this connection with place, this referencing of other things, this depth, this sort of fluidity of movement. And then, you know, it's sort of swiftly followed by the Reformation, this sort of desire to impose control, I think, which goes with the left brain, and this sort of flatness, strange perspective, if indeed there is any, this abstraction and lots of different scenes, you know, broken up, different parts. You know, as Ian puts it in the book, words to this effect, you know, that rather than standing freely looking towards the altar, people were regimented in pews in this period, facing the pulpit from where the word of God is proclaimed. And so, you know, you get this emphasis on the word, and this sort of didactic telling you what to think, what to do. Ideas about the thing become more important than the thing itself, you know, in these left brain periods. That's certainly something I've experienced, I think, in advertising recently. So the parallels, if I were just to show you two ads, if I may, one from, you know, the mid 1980s, and then I'm going to show you one from you know, more recently. You've had a clue as to what they look like already. But I'd like to look out for the right brain features in the first ad. So this has got a sense of place. So we know exactly what's going, roughly where we're supposed to be, you know. There's a dog barking, there's traffic noise, there's all sorts of things in the background that give us that root us in place. There's also a sense of lived time, people, characters interacting with each other, a sense of betweenness, facial gestures, expression, prosody, you know, the sort of emphasis. There's playing with language rather than using language as a tool to tell you to do something, you know, messing with it. And it's a metaphor, the whole thing's a metaphor, and it also references something else. So it's just like the paintings on the right here. So let me just show you this ad, if that's okay, and let's just have a watch.
The water in Mallorca doesn't taste like what it ought to.
No. The water in Mallorca don't taste like what it ought to.
The water in Mallorca doesn't taste quite how it should.
Mallorca!
Mallorca?
Mallorca!
Mallorca?
Hi, Dale, any danger of some refreshment in here?
Here you are. Get your laughing gear in there.
Oh, golly. The water in Mallorca
What's that?
don't taste like what it ought to. Gosh. The water in Mallorca don't taste like what it ought
She's cracked it. She's only cracked it.
You're absolutely wrong.
Heineken refreshes the parts what other beers cannot reach.
So it's got you know, the three things that make for brilliant advertising. It's got, as Mark Twain put it, you know, it's got characters, an incident, and a place for it all to happen. And it, you know, you can just see on the face, you know, the right brain is what helps us interpret, you know, facial expressions and all of those things. But the way her face changes when she undergoes the transformation and she speaks, you know, it's a feast for the right brain. So I like to many of the features of the right brain there. A left brain had from a couple of years ago, and look out for the abstraction, you know, people as props, the words, the highly rhythmic nature of the ad, and the way that it, you know, it's sort of me at you, telling you what to think or do, and the focus on things as well rather than people.
Look, everybody wanna go and talk that. At the same time, gotta walk it. Better yet, run, go, hit a lick, divvy up with my homies, and we do it all again. They just wanna find a way out, find a way to put a little food up in their mouth. I can kill a verse and then go about my business. You ain't even see it coming, can I get a witness? When I go to sleep, I only dream about my other dreams. Deception. If you want it, gotta get it, gotta live it, no condition.
There you go. And you know, has many of those left brain features.
Goodness, it's quite remarkable, isn't it, when you see it in that context? But of course, you know, these are images that we're used to being bombarded with every day. And if they're not in the moving image, they're still put in the, you know, visual image on the side of a bus or a billboard, a static image, which also allows no room for the imagination to work, or for the viewer to respond in any particular way.
That's right. I mean, it's what people do with advertising rather than what advertising does to people that matters. You know, I was talking to a chap in the industry, very, you know, eminence grise, Jeremy Bullmore, and he said that, you know, the thing about humor and people laughing at things is it shows that they have made some sort of connection with what you're showing them. You know, that they have understood what's happening and you know, can understand it on probably more than one level. You know, that's what humor tends to be, is able to see things perhaps from two perspectives at once. And you know, that's what's so sorely needed, I think.
So we'll close in a second, but I just wanted to mention that towards the end of the book, I think it's in section 4, and you mention how the advertising world, how it sort of turned sour, really, how the advertising brain turned sour, and that we had a golden age, really, of advertising in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and especially in London. I mean, London was this sort of thriving hub of culture and music, and you know, it was a great time in our history. So
Well,
what's happened since then? Is it largely due to the sort of digital age and this huge advancement in technology, and then perhaps as well this emphasis for investors and the economy to keep seeking more and more and more and faster returns rather than having that sort of patience and
it's yes, it's so many things. It is, I mean, I describe that time as Brian Eno puts it, as a time of senius, you know, where a group of like-minded people worked in friendly competition with each other to sort of outdo the other, and you know, and the creatives were protected really from the encroaching left brain. There was also a lot of money in advertising. This was the sort of beginning of commercial television. And in the 80s, late 80s, you know, the money was sort of, the buying of without getting too technical, the buying of the media was separated from the business of making the ads, and all the money was sort of went into the buying of the media bit.
Yeah.
So you know, and you need, you know, the Renaissance. You know, there was quite a lot of money in the form of the Medicis. You know, so you do need money, and you need people to protect that sort of put a wall around the people making the work, doing the work. You know, it's difficult to create this sense of seniors. It has to come from within. You know, the energy and the vitality of people to bring people with them and connect and create something that feels exciting, that people want to be a part of. So that's what I think we have to do. You know, the digital world, I think, has been one of the reasons why things, a big reason why things have changed. Everything is thought of in engineering terms now. Every problem has a solution. It's become increasingly literal and linear, you know, and whole ecosystems built up around the placement of advertising in digital context. You know, it's very arcane and difficult for any one person to understand fully. And the global ad, you know, as I think I said earlier, is that, you know, if you have to make, it seems that because of efficiencies, efficiency is a very left brain way of looking at the world rather than effectiveness. You know, you have to, Ian talks about the ratio in the book, actually, and associating it with the left brain. But this desire to make an ad that will work everywhere, because it's, you know, it's cheaper to make an ad that works all around the world. When you do that, you lose any sense of place, any reference to local culture. You lose the ability for people to talk, you know, because you can't really speak unless you're using subtitles, which no one would do. So you then you superimpose words on the top, or you have voiceover, which separates you from a place. All of these things, you know, you show bits of things. You never show real cities or real environments. Actors are very expensive, so you tend to avoid people altogether. You know, instead, you know, sets and costumes and all those things, and filming on location, they all cost money. All of those right brain features that we prize and cherish cost money. And so in a world where we're looking at efficiencies, I'm afraid they go out the window, and we're left with unwatchable advertising for the large part. So what we need to do is celebrate that great work, show its effectiveness when it is much more effective. You know, bring some much needed cheer to the commercial world and to our living rooms, because, you know, if you start to get a few people leading by example, you know, you have to hope that others will follow and think, well, I think we want a bit of that too, thank you, and build that sort of excitement and that scene again if we can. That's what I'd like to do, but whether it will be possible, we'll have to see.
Well, I'm sure you will. And also, I think the fact that, you know, advertising can be and should be a force for good as well, as you say in your book. It's not something which is negative. It has become negative, and it's come with a lot of not very nice messages, perhaps,
Yes.
and imagery. But it is and can be used as a force for good, which
that's right. And you know, the famous creative Bill Bernbach, who was so influential in the 1960s in New York. You know, as I say in the book, the quote, "All of us who professionally use the mass media are the shapers of society. We can vulgarize that society we can brutalize it, or we can help lift it onto a higher level. And that's what I hope we'll be able to do.
There we go. Orlando, thank you very much for
That's
having
it,
a chat
Mary.
today. Thank you.
Thank you.